Thank you all for having me. I appreciate the time to be up here. As a psychologist who works with police departments, I could talk a lot about training because I'm actively involved in that. I could talk a lot about psychological screening of officers before they become officers. Could talk about conduct of officers and what's appropriate and not appropriate. But I've decided to shift a little bit this evening in light of what I'm hearing. And I'd like to talk about officers as people. One of the things that I've had the luxury, and in some ways probably the curse of dealing with for the last 15 years, is hearing officers' stories after the fact, after they've had struggles. We as a community tend to view officers in one of two ways. We either see them as superheroes with superpowers, or we see them on the other extreme as the villain who's misusing their power, their authority, those sort of things. I, on the other hand, view them as people, like all of us, who struggle in life, who have difficulties as a result of what they do, who in many ways they have to face what lots of us choose to close our eyes and not view. They also have to deal with situations that many of us choose to run away from. And with that, I want to tell a couple of stories that bring into light some of what the officer deals with during the course of their career. A couple of years back, I was sleeping soundly in my bed about 2 a.m. I get a phone call from a sergeant, and the sergeant says, "Hey, Doc, what are you up to?" And me being a little bit of a sarcastic individual said, "Well, up until about 7 seconds ago, I was in the midst of a great dream." And he said, "Oh, sorry to bother you, Doc, but a couple of my young officers had a difficult call this evening, and they're struggling." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Would you like me to come out now, or how about in the morning?" And he goes, "Well, the morning's fine, Doc." And I said, "Okay. Morning is fine, Doc, is code word for a sergeant. Please come out right now, but I don't know how to ask you that." Okay. So I said, "How about I come out in about 15 minutes? He goes, "Oh, that's great. Come on out." Okay. So I show up at the substation, and I sit down with two of these officers, probably 22 years old. Okay. And I asked the officers what happened. And one of the officers looks at me and says, "Doc, it was kind of a normal call. We got called to the home of a family. Family had about a 16-month-old child who they went to check on. Child wasn't breathing." Okay. So we get called. We show up. My buddy rushes in the room, does CPR on this child, works on the child for probably 15 minutes. Okay. And I can see one of the officers is more visibly upset than the other officer. And so I kind of asked him, I said, "Were you the one doing the CPR?" And he goes, "No, I was watching." And I asked him, I said, "Why? Are you struggling right now?" And he goes, "Well, my buddy's doing the CPR." And right above him was the name of the child. See, I still choke up. He said, "My buddy has a child that same age, same name, and I was watching it." Okay. Long story short, see, now is where I got to put on the tough front, right? Long story short, he tells me, he didn't even think about it. We worked through it. We talked for about 45 minutes. And then guess what happened to those officers? They had to go 10-8. They got to go back and work. Go back to the field. Go back and deal with the next call, the next situation. Okay. Tell a second story. This is an officer who was involved in a shooting. Okay. I go out, deal with this officer on scene. I talk to him. He's doing okay. He's actually feeling all right. little shook up, adrenaline dump. His body's kind of figuring out what happened. One of the things that happens during most crisis situations is our body goes into survival mode. All non-essential functions of the body shut down. Okay? We lose fine motor skills. Okay, they decrease. I always tell folks, you want to try that, go run about 3/4 of a mile, sprint it, and then try to put your keys in the keyhole of your car. You're going to have scratches all over, and then you're going to be mad at me. Okay? That's why I tell you ahead of time. Fine motor skills go away. The officers have tunnel vision, which means they see what's in front of them. Typically, you don't see what's to the side of you. They have what's called auditory exclusion, which is where you don't hear at the same rate as most folks, or as you would normally. Perceptions are distorted, okay, on the part of the individual in that crisis. And so as I'm talking to this individual, he's kind of running through things in his head. He's trying to figure it out. We talk about what he can expect the next couple of days, that he may not sleep, he may sleep, his family may have some ramifications, those sort of things, okay? And he's, yes, sir, I understand, thank you, that kind of approach, okay? And then I let him go. A couple of days later, call him up, we sit down, we have a conversation. He's fine, he's doing good. He goes back to work. Okay? Don't hear from this officer for about 12 months. Fairly close to 12 months on the day. I get a voicemail. And this officer leaves me a voicemail saying, "Hey, Doc, I'm just calling to tell you my wife says I'm an asshole. I need to come see you." Okay. So I call him back, say, "Come on in." We sit down, we talk for a little while. He explains to me what he was struggling with, and what it comes down to is he was still struggling with the shooting. He was having a hard time with the shooting. Okay? And as his stress increased, so did his irritability. As his irritability increased, so did his response to his children and his wife. And so he would lash out. He would say mean things. He would say rude things. Okay? And so he called me. We worked on it. Okay? We talked it through. I didn't hear from that officer for about 6 months. He leaves me another voicemail. Said the same thing in the voicemail, but I don't have to cuss more than once in here. Okay? Comes back in. We do a check-in. We see him. Next 6 months, he calls me again. This officer did that every 6 months for the remaining 5 years of his career, okay? Because he had to do that to cope. The message I'm going to give is real simple. I encourage people to have an open mind and not vilify individuals because we're frustrated or angry at a system. And if we have an open mind, we can have an open dialogue. Thank you for your time.